We met Jim through a client earlier this year. The client had been invested with Jim for years and experiencing great returns, but had some questions about how he could potentially shelter and eliminate the taxes. So we started talking with Jim, and through multiple meetings, we decided he'd be a great fund to offer in the private placement life insurance area. And he plans to launch that fund in February of this year. Jim has a knack for uncovering and exposing overvalued businesses and industries, and is famous for his short on Enron, which was highlighted on the Showtime series Billions earlier this year in a poker scene with Bobby Axelrod. Jim's views on the markets, China, U.S. healthcare, the energy sector, Tesla, are all covered in the press very frequently, and we'll be talking about all of them today. And we're excited about the pairing of Jim and Dan Gilbert, a champion of Detroit, founder of Quicken Loans, and the proud owner of a sports team that's won 15 of the past 16 games. Dan's an amazing investor. His passion and views translate into more than just return. They translate into meaningful change and opportunity for the city of Detroit and for industry. With that, I'm going to pause for a quick video on what's been going on in Detroit and with Dan and his team.
When you've been a leader your entire life, you learn how to turn one day into day one. To do it first, to be an innovator, means you may stumble, you may fall, but relentless, you will move forward. Detroiters are born moving. Our wings have a deep history. Our roads pave the way for every future highway of tomorrow. An international hub full of vitality, of Michigan strength, from the global reach of techno and Motown to the powerful rev of our engines. From style trends to technology, Detroit is the starting line of the world's imagination. We are always shaping, moving, cultivating what's next. We are small business savvy and billion-dollar business bold. A state full of 230-foot pine trees and the summer destination of the monarch butterfly. Surrounded by the beauty of Great Lakes. Detroit is always growing, always in flight. We don't wait for someone else to do it. We don't have time to stand still. Not everyone will understand our pace, but the baton was placed in our hands, so we're finishing strong. If this is home, you own the pearl. If you move here, you move the world. Who else to design the mobility of tomorrow besides the most resilient people on the planet? From custom-made bikes and shiny rims, autonomous vehicles and alternative energy. Mobility as a right in diverse cultural communities. Our land, the foundation of collective steel Michigan hands, holding up families, designing possibility, creating space. We are the solutionaries, forging our way toward the answers, a sacred historical place, fearlessly stepping up to the plate. We are infinite possibility, and our future can't wait. Detroiters have always kept this country moving. Our DNA connected to a passionate work ethic, and authenticity we earned from grandfathers and free-thinking mothers we watch with hard hat and toolbox swagger, sculpt art into dinner for our families. Born on an assembly line of artists, thinkers, educators, scientists, coaches, and philanthropists, we are Southern class and clean Cadillacs, humility and matter of fact. We are a century-old farmers market, the heart and soul of this country's future, the steady sound of design and innovation, and a whole other country is just a bridge away. Dream chasers built Detroit. This is the world city. Design here, design the world. Build here, you'll build the world. Create here, create the world. Move here, move the world.
That was great. I don't know how Amazon can't pick Detroit for its second headquarters after seeing that. So it's a fitting homecoming for Jim, who actually went to high school at Birmingham Groves, to be back here in Detroit, sitting down with Dan Gilbert for what we all know will be a special treat and great conversation. On behalf of myself and the entire Schechter team, we thank you all for being here, and please enjoy Dan and Jim.
Hype it up, hype it up, hype it up, hype it up.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is that your walk on the song? Right there?
I'm ready to move back here after that video.
Yeah,
This
well,
is
we'd
great.
be glad to have you for sure. So I don't even know where to start. I've got so much to ask you, and we got a chance to talk a little bit. And I watched there's a lot of YouTube on you, more than I would have thought, for sort of under the you sort of. Although you're an actor now, how did that acting go?
The Showtime people, I know Brian Koppelman, David Levy, and Andrew Sorkin were the creators of Billions, and when they started the project, we had dinner, and I said, we're a little worried about the dialogue and some of the plot things. Can we run some of this stuff by you, just as a friend, to make sure that we're getting the jargon right, and that it's believable, it's fiction, but, and so I said, sure, just shoot me, if you have any questions, shoot me a thing. To my horror, I saw that I don't will give you any spoilers, but one of the plots at the end of season 2 was Axe infects a certain food stuff to get food poisoning and shorts the stock. I'm like, no, this is not this is not good. But anyway, we had some fun, and they put me in a scene at the poker tournament, which was a lot of fun.
I watched that series, and I watched very little television, but that one. You think we're not going to spend too much time on this, but you think Bobby Axelrod, is that a typical hedge fund guy?
Bobby Axelrod is kind of a composite of a lot of people, and it's sort of like everybody thought they were Gordon Gekko back in the 80s when Wall Street came on, and everyone on Wall Street, all the hedge fund community was like, well, I'm sure that's like me, and I keep saying, no, you don't want to be that guy. He's not the most ethical guy, right?
And he comes up to the line, and then he.
He's passed it a few times.
Yeah,
but anyway,
recently.
It's fiction. It's fun.
Right.
It's not, I joke with the writers. I've said, okay, why don't you come to my 7th floor where my research team hangs out. They are not Abercrombie and Fitch models with chiseled features and six-pack abs. They're a bunch of schlubs with takeout Chinese on their desk and fluorescent light tans. This is the reality. It's not a glass cube in Greenwich. It's more like this. So it's not that glamorous.
Well, let's go back to the sort of, I won't call it unglamorous start, but Milwaukee, Wisconsin, born and raised.
Yeah.
Then you come over here in 9th grade and you go to high school at Groves High School.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know the school hasn't changed probably since the late 70s.
I hope it has.
But not much. And so then you graduate, you go to Yale. You work on Wall Street a little bit, and you decide to open up a fund, right? 1985 or something. So you're unusual because, well, for a lot of reasons, but this one especially. I mean, there's not a lot of guys who are primarily short for a living. So tell us how are you a kind of guy that you go and you play the don't pass on the craps table? Has that always been why, where did that come from, I guess?
So my oldest son once said, Dad's a glass half empty kind of guy, and I think I think he actually has a little bit wrong. Others have said, where you dropped on your head at birth. But I like to say that short sellers, and I'm sitting with one of the ultimate capitalists here, but short sellers are also the ultimate capitalists, right? Because for capitalism to work, that you have to allocate capital correctly, and you also have to be careful that you don't misallocate it or be subject to fraud. And short sellers are the only real-time market detectives out there. I've always joked that the regulators and law enforcement are like financial archaeologists. They'll tell you 10 years after the fact why you lost money. And short sellers are incentivized actually to ferret out the problems in real time.
And you guys, you said something to me when we were talking over lunch. You said that short sellers actually play a role. I mean, they keep Wall Street honest because
Yeah.
they have incentive to.
All right, we're
to get the
incentivized
stuff.
by the marketplace, you know, and in interest of our clients and ourselves, obviously, but to ferret this stuff out. And you know, while we'll be short lots of things that have business model problems, you know, the real home runs and the things that people remember you for are the Enrons and the Valiant Pharmaceuticals and, you know, those, the Drexel Burnham companies.
Boston Chicken,
Boston Chicken.
Seiko.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. And so, and the idea is that people will throw money at not only bad ventures, but fraudulent ventures. I teach a course on the history of financial fraud.
Where do you teach that at?
I teach that at my alma mater, but I also teach it at my family's alma mater, University of Wisconsin. I know I'm in Michigan State country here, but go Badgers. And it's the course has been a lot of fun, but one of the things I teach is that the fraud cycle follows the financial cycle with a lag. So that as bull markets progress, people's sense of disbelief drops, and they get more and more willing to chase returns and chase too good to be true ideas. And most frauds at their core are Ponzi schemes in effect. And when the market turns down, people pull back, they pull their money in, they want redemption, and that's when the Madoffs of the world and others, you know, have problems. And so it's interesting, we go back all the way to the 1680s, the first IPO cycle.
Oh, I thought you were going to say we go back.
No. Well, well, they're not that old. But the first IPO cycle was diving bell companies, of all things, that someone found treasure on the floor of the Caribbean. They then had diving bells where they pumped air in, cast iron things, that people would go and look for, you know, the bottom of the sea and go look for treasure. Well, of course, like anything in capitalism, immediately the bad guys figured out they could salt the sea floor with some gold doubloons and show a demonstration, come up holding gold, and they could sell shares in these, you know, so this is as old as financial markets.
Stuff's been going on a long time.
Exactly.
So are you a buyer of I guess the famous story of Joe Kennedy, John Kennedy's father, who apparently either shorted the market or got out of the market right before the 29 crash because people who otherwise weren't buying stocks, you know, guys working the streets or whatever, all of a sudden started asking him about stocks. Yeah. The theory being, they're the last guys to buy. There's no one left to buy anymore. So is that something that you? So
you know, these anecdotal things you have to be a little careful of because, you know, while there's always anecdotes at the bottom and the top, a lot of them show up well before the bottoms and the top. Having said that, two sort of things struck, three stories struck out from my history on that. In 1999, my wonderful, lovely Aunt Kathy from Okauchee Lake, Wisconsin, who had followed the Beardstown lady and started a stock club with her girlfriends in the mid-90s, and from 96 to 99 was always sort of pestering me for stock ideas she could take to the girls.
Did she short anything?
No. I gave her nice, conservative, long ideas, Dan. And in 1999, she started calling me to give me stock ideas. And I kind of explained to her, Aunt Kathy, like, you know, look, it's tough for the professionals to beat the market. You know, kind of be careful. The second one was when a nightlife guy who started out as a doorman and then became a promoter or whatever I knew in Miami, actually got himself a marquee name as a developer in Miami in 2005, putting up apartment buildings, Miami condos in 2005 and 6. And I go, when the doormen are actually putting up buildings, you got to maybe be a little careful. Finally, also in Miami, the lovely guy who drives for me in Miami for the last 12 years actually has never asked me about a stock or financial advice ever in the 12 years we've known each other. Last Wednesday when I was down there, asked me about Bitcoin. So I don't know. We'll see. I don't know if it...
I was going to hit on that Bitcoin.
Yeah, so it's, you know, it just struck me as, okay, all these years you've known me, you never asked me about the stock market, whatever, but you're asking me about Bitcoin.
So, I mean, my 16-year-old figured out how to get an app, whatever that app's called, Coinbase or something.
Yeah, the markets.
Put $20 in the summer, and now it's worth what? I don't know. What it's worth 10 times or 200.
A friend of mine this weekend told me his daughter in her private school in Manhattan, there's a kid in the private school who's in her class who's a Bitcoin millionaire.
So is there a way with the futures things for us to short Bitcoin? Can we short it? Though?
I think, well,
Can you
with the
technically
futures,
short
with the
it?
futures now trading, yeah, theoretically.
Technically short it. I mean, is
Yeah.
that something you would do, or that you don't?
No,
do?
no. I mean, we have no edge there. I mean, it's a speculative mania. I mean, it's Beanie Babies. It's whatever. I mean, the technology is real, but the ICOs are questionable. And
What's that stand for?
So the initial coin offering. So what's happening away from Bitcoin and from blockchain is that people are now setting up ICOs to finance ventures. So rather than sell you shares, they're basically, in exchange for your cash, you're getting founders coins. And someone explained this best in a New York Times profile. One of the original inventors of Dogecoin, he said it perfectly. He said, so investing in an ICO, which he's telling people to avoid like the plague, is like me saying I'm going to start an online internet casino, and I'm going to basically ask Dan to put up some money, initial capital, but instead of stock, he's going to get founders chips. And those chips' value will be variable depending on how many people come to the casino, how much they gamble online, and whether or not my online casino gets regulated. Now, instead of me being Dan's friend, imagine I'm a stranger on the internet. I may or may not know how to open an online casino, and if I take all his money and buy a fleet of Porsches, he has no recourse to me. That's an ICO.
So these new currencies, instead of stocks or equity in companies.
Right, they're tokens. They're tokens in ventures that will have a. So they're really not much different than non-marketable equities, right? I mean, if we think about them, but because what's happening, like .com, and you remember, and I remember in the late '90s when anyone put .com on anything, they hoped to get a higher valuation. People are doing.
We did that, yeah.
Well, yeah, but it worked out for you. You were the great exception to the rule, Dan.
No, we did the real work after.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes you got to say it first.
But there were lots of people who didn't, and so lots of people now are doing ICOs because they think it's an easy way to raise money as opposed to going through the Jobs Act or a regular IPO.
Jim, it just seems to me, can anyone who, there's a lot of sophisticated investors in this room.
Yep.
Can you picture it coming out any other way but crash? I mean, you never know, right? But
well, there will be great successes, obviously, and there will be lots and lots of people who lose lots of money.
Yeah, that sounds like.
And a lot of money will be stolen, and there'll be a lot of fraud.
Yeah. So let's talk about just a couple of the big sort of stories in your life that you've been part of. Enron, you caught on to Enron before Enron. Everyone knew the name Enron, and just give us a little bit of a hint of how that.
Yeah.
How does that come to be?
I mean, I've always said Enron, and this is going to sound a little odd, Enron was one of our easiest shorts ever. I was basically tipped off on Enron. There was a column in the Texas Wall Street Journal. Back in the day, the Wall Street Journal used to have these regional editions. And a friend from Dallas called me up and said, did you see this Heard on the Street column by this guy, John Weil? John Weil, full disclosure, now works for me as an analyst. And he wrote a Heard on the Street about how the energy merchant banks were celebrating because they got a ruling from the SEC that they could use mark-to-model accounting, often erroneously called mark-to-market accounting, mark-to-model accounting to value these esoteric energy derivatives they were trading, of which Enron was the 600-pound gorilla. And so basically, if Enron cut a deal with Intel to provide them power for 10 years in their Phoenix semiconductor fab, Enron was on the hook of finding the power and delivering at some fixed cost. Intel would pay them some premium to do that, and Enron was basically allowed to take an estimated future value of that stream, no matter what it might cost them, and book it into profit immediately. Now, this was not.
So that's they're taking future earnings.
Yeah.
Sort of capitalizing the earnings and bringing them back.
Yeah, present value,
discounting them.
but having no idea what power costs would be, what debt costs would be. They just had to do one of these.
And so did their auditors sign off on that? No
The auditors signed off on that, and so.
Who were their auditors, Enron?
It never really matters. Because
no,
Arthur Anderson, actually for them it did matter. They went out of business.
No, it's like Paulie said in The Godfather, won't be seeing him no more.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah, so.
So I read this and I started looking at the company, and I looked at their filings, and the first thing I noticed was, number one, all the executives were leaving. A huge number of senior executives had begun to depart in '99 and 2000, and that's always one of our greatest red flags. When you see wholesale executive departures at a company, hold on to your wallet. And we'll talk about a company where that's happening later, I think. Number two, they had all these odd disclosures. And I had to read the 10K 3 times. And if I have to read a 10K 3 times to figure out how a company makes money, again, you got to kind of be careful. But in the back of the footnotes were these odd footnotes. They're hiding in plain sight, where entities with which Enron holds a general partnership stake and which a senior executive of Enron is the general partner, are doing business and trading with Enron in a variety of securities, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, wait a minute, how do you have an affiliate where senior executive turns out to be Fastow, the CFO, was the general partner, and they're buying and selling assets with Enron? It's hopelessly conflicted. What they were doing was they were putting their questionable investments in those vehicles, and the ultimate fraud that came out later was that they had given a secret agreement with the buyers of those partnerships that if they lost money, Enron would issue stock to make them good. And
that
Enron,
was not disclosed.
That was the fraud that was never disclosed.
I mean, it's just amazing they put a foot in. So it's almost like leaving you breadcrumbs, and you got to go down the road.
Well, there was a great back and forth between Malcolm Gladwell and Joe Nocera, two great writers, about whether Enron was a mystery or a puzzle. And in a puzzle, you have enough information to solve it. With a mystery, you may never know. And it's kind of an interesting, and I believe actually Enron was a bit of both. There was a lot enough you could have found to make an investment case to be short, but there was a missing element that we didn't know until October of 2001 when it was disclosed that the buyers had this secret put agreement.
Oh, when you're a guy like you and you've got it right in a big way, should you just wait till the end till it goes to zero, or are you covering at any point?
In Enron's case, there was a couple of things. We covered in single digits. So we started shorting the stock around 60. It went to 80, and then basically straight down. There was one great moment, however, in November of 2001. The company was clearly on the ropes. They had not filed yet. And the stock was in the mid-teens, maybe low teens. And the Me Too company from across the street, a company called Dynegy, everybody kind of forgets this, made a bid for Enron in the height of its distress. And Enron stock went from maybe 12 to 18. Dynegy, which was the sort of Enron B team, everything Enron did, they did later and worse. Their stock went from 20 to 30 on the view that they were getting a bargain and there were synergies and they could fire some people and blah, blah, blah. So we were listening to the conference call, sort of stunned that this was even happening. And someone asked the Dynegy CEO, now, are you comfortable with Enron's accounting? And I swear to God, he said, well, that's the good news. We looked at their books and their accounting's the same exact as ours. We actually went out and shorted. I made more money on Dynegy on the short side than I did on Enron. Dynegy went from 30 to 3
So that's do you call that? Is that what it's called? A dead cat bounce?
Well, that was also called good luck and serendipity too.
It's unreal. So and again, we spoke about this, but I found this very interesting. You think there's a certain personality, or you're born with an ability to short, because you know, and your videos, and you've been publicly saying this for a long time. You know, it's Wall Street in America generally is an optimistic place,
as it should be.
As it should be. So you have an interesting strategy where you believe in the overall American story and capitalism, and so you're long the market as a whole, but then you look for individual Enrons or whatever to go short. Is that in a nutshell? And tell me about the personality you need to have to do that.
So basically, the ethos of why the firm was set up and sort of the reason we exist is that we believe that a good short portfolio, meaning lots of bad stocks, is the best way to finance your longs. And so a short position is a liability on your balance sheet, and you guys are all smart. And basically, if it actually makes money, think of Warren Buffett's property casualty portfolio that actually throws off a surplus, a combined ratio surplus. So if you can actually finance the longs with a short portfolio that doesn't go up, or as much as the market goes up, you have a good deal, right? And that's really, at the end of the day, we have a variety of funds, market neutral, 190-90, which is our flagship, and then short only. We let the client decide where they think about the market. I'm market agnostic. I'm focusing on my short ideas. But as to what makes a good short seller, I used to think that you could train someone on the short side, that it was just a mirror image of going long. You did the same fundamental work, you did lots of due diligence, you looked at the numbers, you talked about the business plan, and I don't think that anymore. I mean, I think a lot of that's rooted in behavioral finance, Dan, in that studies have shown that most rational people have their ability to make the proper decision breaks down in an environment of negative reinforcement. So think about someone who's constantly being belittled at home, or the ultimate example maybe is an interrogation where your will to withhold information is broken down. If you think about Wall Street is a giant positive reinforcement machine, right? Everybody in this room, by and large, is the result of working hard as a kid, going to school, getting good grades, going to probably a good school, working hard, getting a job and doing well, or making great entrepreneurial decisions, right? So all of that is a positive reinforcement machine, as it should be. In the financial markets, basically the noise you hear all day, I call it the Muzak of the investment world, right? So when I wake up in the morning and look at my screen at 5:30, 6 o'clock for the first time, we have 70 stocks we're short globally. A good 10 to 20% will have buy rating reaffirmed, new buy recommendation, earnings estimate raised 3% at Merrill Lynch, CEO on CNBC, takeover rumor out of London, whatever it might be. And it's just noise for the most part. You got to see it, but it's noise. And people on the long side just are used to that. That's just the nature of the beast. But
So
if you're
where do you get these, and what is the characteristics of the person who is capable of short?
So the good short seller, I think, has to have the ability to actually just drown that out and say, I've done my work. He or she has done their work and has the courage of their convictions based on their work, even if it might be diametrically opposed with everybody else on the street is saying, like Enron.
Yep.
Everybody had a buy. And so at that point, you have to have that ability, and not everybody has it. And basically, I think when I see it, I know it. When I see it in a young analyst of mine or one of my students.
Describe, I'm really curious about this. Describe do they look a certain way? Do they act a certain way? Do they have no soul? Are they, they're not chiseled, we know that. But
No, they're not. No, they're not.
Give us just a take.
So the thing I see often is in research meetings or in interactions with my staff is if a stock is going, everything works when a stock's going your way, but when a stock's going against a young analyst, they're terrified, right? And we take that, the partners generally make the recommendations in our firm, and that kind of puts us apart. We're kind of top heavy. But the team still, the analysts still work as a staff, and they get kind of wrapped up in the idea as well. And when something's not working, and the analyst comes into me and says, there's a new development, and I need to know, I don't care about where the stock's going, I need to know the news so I can make the decision. But when they come and they're just terrified, and the stock's going against them, or going against the firm, and I just see that they begin to doubt, when they begin to doubt the idea,
Yeah.
I know they'll never be a portfolio manager. They might still be a great analyst.
So the noise gets to them.
The noise gets to them.
So
And the really good ones are like, yeah, they're all saying that, but we've done this work, and we know that's not right.
like
That's when I know that maybe they have it.
Sergeant Friday from Dragnet would be a good short guy. Like the facts, I want the facts.
I think
That kind of-
Sergeant Friday would probably be a very good short seller.
It's a lot of younger people here have no idea what I'm talking about. Go look it up on YouTube.
They'll look at the Dan Aykroyd version, not
Right,
the
that's
Jack
right.
Webb.
That's right.
I mean, we're really old.
Yeah, that's true. But anyway, Mark here a little bit. So Bobby Axelrod on Billions. Those of you, how many people here watch that show? So it's a good idea to have an office psychiatrist. Yes, in your business. I'm fascinated by that.
I think there are firms that have office psychiatrists. My budget's just not that big. I'm on the short side, Dan. So
I gotcha.
So we don't have office psychiatrists, and yeah.
I ran that idea by a couple of our guys. I said they were honest. Said, Dan, you're going to need a panel, not just one. Okay, so We scrapped the idea. Talk to us about your feeling overall today in the marketplace. We have a Dow, and I don't follow the market daily, but I hear the noise myself.
Yeah.
Dow Jones at record highs, S&P
Yeah.
at record highs, all this stuff. Your overall view, I mean, are we in another, I don't want to use the word bubble, but are we in an extreme high right now? Multiple of earnings, is it at an all-time high?
The median is, the
Yeah.
mean
Yeah.
isn't, but the mean is still, the peak was 99, 2000, but the median equity is probably as pricey as it's ever been. Now, rates are as low as they've ever been, right? So in my investing history, I got on the street in 1980, started my fund in 85. Basically, interest rates have gone from 14% to 0. That's not going to be replicated again, I don't think, right? That is a once in a lifetime, once in a generation drop in rates.
And just for I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just why do you feel interest rates affect, why does it affect a multiple of earnings?
Well, again, I mean, it should affect, all things being equal, lower rates should give you a higher cap rate, or give you a lower cap rate, to use a real estate term, but basically a higher multiple of earnings. The problem, of course, is when you get very, very low rates, you may have more deflation, and so future growth might not be there. But all things being equal, now very few times are all things equal. However, this once in a generation, when I started on the street, McDonald's was a 7 times earning and growing at 20% a year, right? That now, if you're growing 20% a year, you're at 40 times earnings. Right. And so the ability to buy great companies that were compounding at deeply discounted prices is long gone. And so we don't have a margin of safety anymore, we have a margin of error. Right. And so in terms of our opportunity set in our global fund, we were big China bears in 2010 for the next sort of 4 or 5 years of that, but in the past few years...
You're not talking about pandas, you're talking about being negative on China.
on the economic system,
right,
not the country
bears.
as a whole. I know people...
No, I'm thinking about panda bears.
No, not panda bears.
Okay.
No. Those are rodents anyway, Dan.
They are rodents?
They're rodents, yeah.
Anyway. Wow. Well, I figure if anyone's going to know about bears, it's you. So.
Yeah, or rodents,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
But, so, in any case, but in the past few years, we've reduced our China shorts in our global fund to the lowest it's been, because we're seeing most of the opportunities in the United States on the short side.
And so let's talk about a couple industries that I've heard you talk about and we talked about. Fracking is a little bit of an issue here for a lot of reasons. Accounting, you're going to talk about that. The U.S. health markets, you're worried about deflation, aren't you?
I'm worried that the healthcare, the U.S. healthcare economy, which is one of the largest sectors, about 18% of GDP, for the first time ever is going to be facing deflation going forward.
And why is that?
A lot of reasons. First of all, I think first of all, let me step back. The ACA, Obamacare, was one of the greatest windfalls for the U.S. healthcare industry ever. I always joke that the one group you never hear about complaining about Obamacare or repealing Obamacare is the healthcare industry. Because if you look at healthcare stocks and profitability, it's done nothing but shoot up since 2010. Those days are over, and they're over for a lot of reasons, not least of which is the U.S. government is finally basically getting to a point where they're going to offload a lot of the responsibility back to the states in the form of Medicaid block grants. The new budget actually cuts healthcare expenditures for the first time.
Does it cut the growth?
It cuts absolutely cutting dollars for the first time. Yeah. And a lot of people haven't figured that out yet. And then finally, we're getting the most important thing for people in this room and other is the employer-based system, which is still 50% of all covered lives in this country, has really dramatically changed since Obamacare. And we've gone to basically companies paying for 90 to 99% of your care to much higher copays and deductibles for employees. And I know in my firm, even though we have a platinum plan for my employees, we've gone from a $10, $15 copay at the pharmacy to 20%. And so for lots of reasons, lots of households now in the last handful of years have begun to grapple with the idea that they're actually beginning to pay out of pocket now big amounts of their healthcare costs, and they're beginning to realize how expensive some of this stuff is. They never did before.
And you think it's going to, by the virtue of the fact that millions of consumers, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, are cognizant of it. And
I think that in fact usage will go down. I think they're going to go after some of the rent seekers, some of the most egregious, which were short. Companies that are overcharging people, where this is now coming to light. The guys, one company were short, Mallinckrodt, which I've talked about publicly, makes all their money basically from a compound called Acthar. And I'm just going to tell you this because it's worth hearing. Acthar was purchased by a company called Questcor a number of years ago for $400,000. They bought the rights. Acthar was a basically steroidal like cortisone. It was only indicated for one thing, infantile spasms back in the 50s. It's now used for migraine headaches, tennis elbow, lower back pain, and basically lots of things that cortisone would be used for. Acthar was $40 a dose in 2001. When Questcor bought it for $400,000, they raised the price to $4,000 a dose. Mallinckrodt came in and bought Questcor for $6.5 billion plus in 2014, and has now hiked the price to $44,000 a dose. This is cortisone.
Is it under patent?
It's under patent, but the Journal of American Medicine put a paper out this summer saying, who are the doctors who are prescribing this? This is basically outrageous. Now, why is this important? It's the 5th largest drug in terms of expenditure on Medicare, so we're paying for all this. It's also driving up, private pay costs. There's only a handful of doctors that are prescribing this. Well, why? Are they getting kickbacks? We're going to find out. But this kind of stuff, there's tons of it going on in the healthcare economy. And I think as the dollars get tighter, as the pie doesn't expand but shrinks, we're going to be looking for more and more bad actors like this to basically say, okay, no. And I've often said that over the past 20 years in healthcare, the providers have found more and more innovative ways to get paid, like Acthar. And I think going forward, the payers are going to find more and more innovative ways to not pay for this stuff.
How about just quickly on big data when it comes to health?
Yep.
Like we even notice now with our employees, we can tell based on whether someone goes on short-term disability, long-term disability. There's a certain all of a sudden with all this data. That means there's a 82% chance this person's going to quit in the next 3 weeks because they take all the benefits before that. I mean, there's all these things you're just hard to see. How much is that going to affect things?
My daughter's actually getting her master's at Imperial College in London in healthcare policy, and I just saw her recently. She came back home to visit, and she said, "Dad, all we're doing is taking big data and finding ways to make it to cut costs in healthcare." That's her program. So it's coming, and it's already here, but it's coming. And the U.S. system, the U.S. system is kind of the worst of all worlds unless you're a healthcare provider, because we have this government that pays all bills, basically no questions asked, right? And fee for service, Medicare Part D by law means we can't negotiate drug prices like Acthar. Insanity, right? That's just nuts. No one would run a business that way. And you can do common sense thing that would increase outcomes, increase health, better health, at lower prices. And by the way, the rest of the industrialized world is freeloading on us because they pay marginal cost. We pay marginal cost plus R&D plus marketing.
I always wondered if let's just say 80 years ago, companies gave all their employees food cards as opposed to health cards.
Right.
And food was provided, and you went and you got food for free. And then all of a sudden, we announced no more, we're going to cut it out and get free market on food, and everybody be in the streets saying, we're all going to starve, people are going to starve. And all of a sudden, well, we all know what happened. It's one of the best capitalist things ever. You go into a grocery market. To me, when I walk into a grocery market, big ones, I think it's like the biggest miracle ever. Like you have food that's fresh from everywhere around the world. And
right, the pricing mechanism.
It's unreal.
We have to be a little careful though, Dan, because we don't shop for healthcare the same way exactly, because there are these gatekeepers like our doctors.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The system's not.
Yeah, and so if a doctor says you need X, you're not going to say, well, wait a minute, I'm going to go to Washington, I'm going to go to Oregon and see if I can get X at a cheaper price, right? Yeah. Your choices are limited, they're regional or local, and you're being told, because you don't have enough medical education, obviously, what you need to do. And so the consumer side of it is challenged for lots of reasons, and that's the trouble with the total free market solutions in healthcare. We don't shop for it the same way, unfortunately.
Let's move over to another American car company, since this is a town and city that.
Yeah.
So there's a company called Tesla.
What? Who?
Yeah. And actually, we have a Tesla on our. It's my wife's car, but once in a while I get in. It's a very fast golf cart.
It's not your primary vehicle, though, is it?
No,
it's like your third car.
Yeah.
Well, for you, it's probably your 30th car.
No,
But
we're all American cars here in Detroit. And you know what? And I just get a little nauseous because when you go really fast, like 0 to 60 and whatever it is, but there's no engine sound and there's no gears.
Yeah,
it's like you're on a roller coaster or a golf cart.
So a little whoosh,
Yeah, so it gets a little crazy for me. So give us your thoughts. This guy's he's
an icon for this bull market.
Right, and he's building cars and in automated vehicles. It's going to turn into soon, and he's got space stuff going on.
Yeah.
I don't know. He wants to go to Mars.
That's his goal.
I mean, I thought Mars sucks. I mean, you look at Mars. Mars sucks. I mean, Mars is like -80. There's nothing there. It's just red stone dust.
Right.
Why do we want to go to Mars? We'll get into that later.
Right.
So, talk to us about Tesla. You're
I'm not a fan. No, I'm not a fan. So, Tesla, to me, every bull market has sort of its poster children for the bull market, both good and bad. And I believe Tesla is one of the bad ones for this market. And the reason for that is that Elon Musk has succeeded in a public vehicle to keep selling a dream. And when the dream becomes a little bit mundane, he sells you the next dream. But he's raising lots and lots of money. This is not an Amazon. This is a company that's in a capital-intensive business, auto OEM, no matter what he tells you, and is struggling. And they lose money selling the $100,000 vehicles. They're having problems getting the mid-priced vehicle out, and it's not mid-priced. It's actually closer to $60,000, as you can order the Model 3 today. And of course, the response now is to tell you he's got a semi coming out in 2019 and a Roadster coming out in 2020. Both of those, I believe, are not true, in my opinion. He would have to have the production lines already approved for those. They're not approved anywhere that we can find. So it's very doubtful he's going to have that semi out in 2019. Yet he's out raising money, both in the form of deposits and most likely a future stock or bond offering on those sorts of promises. And
is he already? What is he at $300-something a share right now?
Yeah, almost 350.
Why isn't he raising equity all the time?
I don't know. He will be, I think. And then finally you had stuff like the Solar City acquisition, which just really was unbelievably bad corporate governance. So he owned a big chunk of Solar City. We were short it. Solar City, in our opinion, was going bankrupt. The model of rooftop solar leasing has moved on to distributed solar. They got the market wrong. The stock was plummeting. The bonds were yielding over 20%. And out of the blue, he decides that Tesla should buy Solar City for $8 billion in assumed debt and stock. For those of you that are financial people, Solar City at the time was losing $300 million in negative EBITDA a year before the debt service and depreciation. And he basically saved his own equity investment by having Tesla buy him out, which I just think is abhorrent. And was
how did the board approve that?
The board approved it and the shareholders approved it, and without much of a blink, because A, he controls the board, and B, the shareholders believe pretty much anything he tells them. And that to us was sort of a real sign that this thing had taken a dark turn. Now I mentioned to you the Enron executive departures. We keep a list of the Tesla executive departures that we see. He doesn't disclose them, but we find them via LinkedIn, and people send us. And it's a spreadsheet now that goes a full 2 pages over the past couple of years of all the senior people that have left Tesla. They've got there, saw what's happened, and obviously went out. There's something wrong there. And on top of that, you look at the accounting, and then finally, my own prediction, based on nothing more than seeing guys like this operate, I think he's going to leave Tesla within a couple of years.
You mean himself leave Tesla?
I think he's going to move over to SpaceX.
What percent does he own of Tesla?
He has actually a reasonable amount. It's about $10 billion, $20 billion.
Is he selling stock right now himself?
His family is, he's not. Although he cashed out some for his foundation a year or so ago. But I think he will start selling stock once he becomes the non-executive chairman. And my own view is he'll just sort of leave it to his number 2, and he'll be able to say later, well, it was fine when I left it, you know. But if you look at the latest Rolling Stone cover story of him a month ago.
Is that a magazine still, Rolling Stone? No, I mean, see, it's not online only? Can you buy the
I think
magazine?
you get it online. I think you get.
You can still buy the
I
magazine.
remember you used to buy it at Michigan State. You probably
Yeah, I
used to
did.
buy it.
No,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we also bought a magazine,
Okay.
Rob Report. You probably read it when you
Rob Report. Well,
Yeah.
I can't afford that stuff,
No,
but
that's-
it's aspirational.
Yeah,
I see
no,
it.
but
But anyway, so if you go back, if you go online or go to the head shops or wherever you can get Rolling Stone, I don't know. The cover story and all the glossy photos are him at SpaceX, not at Tesla. Him with a space helmet, him on top of like a centerfold on top of a rocket. And that was very telling to me. But if you go inside, they're all rock. And I think he's getting the world ready for the lateral move over to SpaceX. His dream is to go to Mars. I think Tesla's heading for a brick wall. I think that makes a lot of I've seen guys like this before. He's going to hit the parachute before the shareholders do.
Maybe before he hits Mars, hopefully. So I have just two, and I think we're down like to a minute or so.
Yeah,
before
going fast.
you have a Q&A session, right? I noticed one comment and just two questions. The comment I noticed is I've had the luxury or the honor of also interviewing the sort of, I guess, the mirror image other side of you, but that would be like Warren Buffett and these kinds of interviews. But what I noticed is you guys are basically the same. I mean, the way you do the work, you're doing the work, you can hear it and everything that's coming out, you're doing the work, going deep, 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 and you stick to you're ignoring the noise, just sort of pushing things aside and sticking. There's not much different between
About $100 billion, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sooner or later that adds up, you get to so. The other quick question, and I meant to ask this earlier, and this to me is just, I don't know, something doesn't fit with this in the markets, is that why are we at all-time highs on everything?
Right.
And we have the least amount of IPOs and people going public and companies going
Yeah,
public.
it's a good question.
I mean, that really is something's not right there.
So I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the private markets have gotten very robust, Dan. So founders and venture capitalists and things like WeWork and Uber and all these unicorns really can buy now and sell shares in these liquid private markets. So that's helped. And I think that a lot of them just simply because of that, because they have the liquidity events now in the private markets, that was the allure, right? They didn't necessarily want the public. They don't want to file. They don't want to deal with people like me. And so why not stay private as long as they can keep getting funding? And that's.
But aren't they under pressure? I mean, if you're a venture capitalist, so these guys
Right.
that come in, I mean, your end for most of it is, let's get you public.
Right, and get out,
and
right?
get out.
But
So-
now
so-
if I'm Kleiner Perkins, SoftBank will buy my stake, right? I don't have to file it, right? Or Alibaba will buy my stake, or there's all these big buyers now, these pools of capital, sovereign wealth funds, who will actually, instead of the public, they've become kind of, dare I say it, the dumb money, and are buying the stakes from the venture and the executives. I mean, SoftBank has a document out saying that they have a 300-year time frame. Like, if you read it, it's almost gibberish. But, people are like, oh my God, he's a visionary. And so just go read it. It's online. I urge you, read the SoftBank sort of statement and from my Oshi-san and tell me it's not gibberish.
Well, 300 years, what is that, 1717? Is that, I'm trying to think of 300 years ago. Do I have it right? 1717?
Yeah.
I mean, that's like 40 years before Washington was born.
Yeah,
That's a long time.
Yeah.
Stuff can happen.
You would have a few forks in the road on that one,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. That's just, so
they've found buyers, and so who needs the sort of scrutiny that public companies get if you get the liquidity in the private markets and you can stay private?
So do you think removing Dodd-Frank or making it easier? I mean, I'll just tell you from our own experience of whether or not our flagship, we wouldn't even fathom the thought. We wouldn't even have the thought of going public.
Yeah.
For that reason only, right? Why would you want to waste everybody's time?
And if you don't need to, why would you?
Yeah, and
So
everything else. I think. Do you think that? I mean, at least I can't speak for.
And also, the debt markets have gotten easier for private companies to access, and
Some,
so
not mid American business,
but
right?
but larger companies, and so I think there's there's a fair amount of reasoning. And then, of course, the public, money is burning a hole in their pockets, so they've discovered Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's true.
So we've got the outlet there.
So just one or two last things. We'll put, is that all right? That the Q&A session will be big here, you know. What do you say when people say to you about these shorts? And I did it to you, and you had a great answer. Yeah, but what about Amazon? Everyone said they're short them too.
Yeah.
What's the difference? You had a great
Yeah,
answer.
so when I started out on Wall Street, I was in investment banking in Chicago, and I was at Blythe Eastman Payne Weber. Our biggest account was McDonald's. So I had this junior guy to immerse myself in the history of McDonald's. And by the way, if you haven't seen the movie The Founder, go see it. It's really a good business movie. And it covers some of what made McDonald's unique, which was McDonald's figured out the realty model. They're in the real estate business, not the hamburger business. And for years in the 70s and 80s, any consumer company that was kind of getting some growth and looked like it could be this monster company, people say it's the next McDonald's. And I always used to say, you know, grumble on breath, there was no next McDonald's. And nowadays, when you get confronted with a sort of questionable business model like a Tesla or whatever, where you can sort of model out, it just doesn't work, right? They're a car company, it loses money. Someone will say, yeah, but you could have said that about Amazon, right? I get that all the time. And so I decided to look back at Amazon. And I remembered it from the late 90s, but I went back and recently just did a deep dive into the financial history of Amazon. And what I found was the following. Amazon went public in 1997. Their last public offering was in 2001. They've been free cash flow positive every single year since 2001. But the really intriguing thing was, until 2012, when they got into the AWS, basically the cloud, they had no capital in their business. Quite literally, we financed them through their retail model, that if you bought books or clothes or whatever, you paid them up front, and they paid their suppliers in 30 or 60 or 90 or 180 days. And basically, like Dell Computer, that financed their plant and equipment. And so for years, Amazon, you know, really didn't make any money, but I kept saying they don't have any capital in the business, right? It's the ultimate efficient machine. Once they started investing in AWS and more warehouse, they started making a profit. The money followed the investment, and I know that's one of your dictums. And so there really isn't been a business model like this. Alibaba doesn't have this business model. eBay doesn't have this business model. And so there is no next Amazon. And for someone to say that a Tesla, which is capital intensive, tons of debt, raises stock and bond offerings every 3 to 6 months.
As a guy who's going to Mars.
As a guy who's going to Mars, whatever, you know, and by the way, Bezos is too, interestingly enough.
Yeah,
he's got his own rocket company.
Yeah.
So it was a unique animal. And same with Apple. People say, oh, you could have said that about Apple. Well, no, Apple has 40% gross margins in the consumer products business, you know, and Tesla's gross margins are 18%. And so, you know, down the line, and the problem is a lot of these statements don't hold up. When you actually go back and analyze and understand what made Amazon unique, you realize it was unique. And that for everyone to say, I'm going to justify any valuation, $60 billion on Tesla, or whatever it might be, because it's the next Amazon, good luck.
Schechter, I understand that Schechter's changing their name just to Schechter. Is that accurate? Not Schechter this, Schechter that, just Schechter. Sort of like Madonna, Cher, Sting, Eminem, covers it all. But you guys, I mean, it's, you know, I would like to just thank you for bringing someone like Jim here, and I think you're doing great stuff. And,
Thank you.
Connecting, that's just fantastic. So, you know. And one last thing here, and I guess we're going to some Q&A. We came up with a name together. We brainstormed, but we came up with a name for Jim's autobiography, or it could be just biography that somebody else writes. I'll let you tell everybody what it's going to be called.
Life's too short. Right? So I'm going to give him a credit in the acknowledgments when we write the book. So thanks, Dan. That was fantastic.
And on the way out, you guys, we do have, these are normally $19.99 plus shipping and handling. But these are our culture books. And by the way, these are the last time we're ever giving out the 2017 edition, 2018 coming out. Literally, they're on eBay, I swear to God. They go up in value.
I love it.
So, you know, check it out. So,
We're
Mark,
going to
back
get
to
into
you.
a Q&A for the remainder of this
Oh,
afternoon.
wait, before, we have 30 seconds. Play that clip, 30 seconds. You got it? It's a 30-second clip. You're gonna wanna see it. Sorry, I blew it. I got a note here, though.
And now it's my pleasure to say, shuffle up and deal.
I'm going out before the final table in this thing out.
I've never called out the most powerful company in the energy sector as a fraud and been right. So, you're evil.
It was a lot of fun. Now, a lot of those guys were, a lot of the guys that you just sort of saw, they were all professional poker players. Brian Koppelman, who's one of the creators, is a big poker player, and he did his first movie was a movie called Rounders, which a lot of people know Ed Norton and Matt Damon as the sort of underground poker scene in New York. So he was dying to do a poker scene, and that was that.
You were, I think could be best supporting actor.
Let's not go that far.
No? Okay.
Great. So before we get into some questions, I just wanted to share that, when we met Jim back in April, besides being impressed with his brilliance and tons of knowledge, we were asking him tons of things. He knows a lot. It was really his, we walked into his office, thought maybe we'd have, 15, 20 minutes to kind of meet him and talk to him. And after an hour of talking about Mark Fidrich in Detroit and him asking us questions about our businesses, our families, we really built a nice relationship with him, and we felt that he was just a real down-to-earth Midwestern value guy, and we thought it would be great for all of you guys to come and get to share a little piece of Jim.
Well,
For coming in.
and thanks.
And for this Q&A section here, we thought it would only be fitting if Jim wore his Groves hat
Oh, God.
and
Go
Danny wore his Southfield Lathrop Chargers hat, which doesn't exist anymore.
No.
May,
Oh, my
Going
God.
up on eBay and
may it
value.
rest in peace.
Yes.
And I got my Southfield Lathrop Chargers.
Okay, I'll kick it off. So, really interesting, and thanks for being here.
Jerry,
So
just tell everybody who you are. Just
I'm Jerry Anderson, the CEO of DTE Energy, an energy company here in town. And we have a trading company, an energy trading company, and did in 2001.
Oh, boy.
And so we were in a lot of transactions with Enron.
Everybody was.
Yeah, everybody was.
Yeah.
They were the market. And so I remember what you were talking about very well. But we had I hired a new head of that trading company who got us out about 8 months before they finally toppled. And he got us out because he hired one of these, he looked at hiring one of these departing executives.
Right.
And as he dug in, what he found out is the guy who was sent to fix the Midwest found out that the problem was they had no accounts receivable function. They were marking these deals but weren't collecting the cash. And
Yep.
he called me and said, if that's the state of affairs, we got to exit everything. So question for you is, you've got this list now at Tesla of
Yeah.
departing execs. Do you ever get the opportunity to have conversations with Tesla execs? And if so, what are they telling
So
you?
we're very careful. The two people we tried not to talk to, and it was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal back in '06, the intelligent networks of ex-executives and experts, we began to worry about that because you always don't want to get material non-public information, which you can still get from a departed exec. And I never wanted one of my analysts who wouldn't know better to get in on a conversation and find out something they shouldn't, and in effect we're still trading on it, right? That's just a no-no. And so we stopped all our relationships with the third-party network guys, and that's still kind of a big business. But we just always worry about that. And so the same thing with former executives. I don't want to initiate a conversation with a former executive and find out something I shouldn't that's material and non-public. If it's public, if it's out there on LinkedIn, or we can find somebody has left the company, that's all well and good. But I don't want him telling me something or her telling me something that I shouldn't know.
So ex-execs are considered a source of non-public, right?
Well, they can be, yeah. It depends what they tell you. And what I don't want to be is in a conversation with someone and they're fine telling me all this stuff, and then they cross a bright line and say, oh, and I knew of some fraud inside the accounts receivable. Like, I'm restricted in the stock. I can't trade on it. And I never want to put my clients in that position. So we're pretty careful on that, and we avoid that. Same thing, just a corollary, we don't voluntarily share our stuff with regulators or law enforcement. Now, that might surprise you, but I'm not in law enforcement. That's not my role, right? If they approach me and want to know what we know about Valiant Pharmaceuticals or Enron or whatever, I'm happy to tell them. But I don't want to be initiating any kind of regulatory investigation or law enforcement. That's not my role, and that's not my client's role. So it's something that you have to be careful about, and as I say, I never inadvertently want one of my staff to be put in that position, and it's not worth it.
Can I just see a show of hands as how many people have questions so we can balance timing here? Great, I see about 6, 7. Okay, well, because he's my brother, I'll pick Greg here. Came in all the way from Seattle for this. What do you got there, Greg?
I had a kind of operational question with regard to short selling. When I buy a stock long, I just hang on to it.
Right.
If I wanted to short Tesla, I would have to choose a time frame.
No.
No?
No.
So, I was curious how you deal with that.
No, it's all, unless you're buying put options. No, there's a short position is open-ended. It's a short position is actually seen as the IRS as an indebtedness. I'm borrowing money, and so it's why actually short sellers have never gotten capital gains treatment on their gains. Right. So the IRS looks at it as a commercial transaction. So assuming it's a big liquid stock like Tesla, or which is a big liquid stock, or IBM, or whatever it might be, theoretically the short position is open-ended in terms of timing.
Just, technically, because when somebody explained this to me 5 years ago, I was the same way, I didn't understand, the light bulb went on. You own 100 shares of Microsoft, good one. You still there, or you gone, you're left there? Okay. I borrow your shares from you, and I sell them to Jim.
Right.
Now I owe you the shares back. The only way I get them back is going to the market and buy it. If I buy it lower, right, now I have the shares, I give them back to you. I mean, that's a technical definition of shorting, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Did I get that right? Was that right?
You got it, but
Tesla.
I'll give you one other little inside baseball curveball, however. A lot of people think that actually that you can only short the number of shares that would be in the float. That's not true. The same share can be shorted over and over and over again, assuming the buyer puts it back in a margin account. And so what has to happen when you borrow the 100 shares of Microsoft, sell them to me, there's now 200 shares long and 100 shares short. The net number is still 100, but the gross number is inflated. So you could have in a very speculative stock a short position that's multiples of the float. And a lot of people don't get that.
And the technical definition of a squeeze is he asks for his stock back to go sell it.
And I can't borrow it somewhere else, so actually I'm forced to go into the market to return the loan. But that happens very rarely these days.
Al. Thank you.
I'd like to ask you, Jim, about the model you see here in Detroit for the other car companies.
Yeah.
We understand the Tesla model, but we have a lot of, heavily capitalized fixed asset companies, and they need to fund billions of new product and new developments. What do you think of that model?
So I'll start it with a Detroit story. Do I have time? I'll take you back to 1975 in Detroit, and this is I was telling last night at dinner. I was telling this story, and it still kind of gives me chills when I tell this story. A good friend of mine, my best friend in high school, his father was an engineer at GM in one of the divisions. I think it was Oldsmobile, might have been Buick. Anyway, a Greek guy, University of Michigan grad, worked his way up post-World War II through GM, been there forever. And I was having dinner at his house, and he was looking at his son and me. He goes, "What are you boys going to do when you go to after you go to college?" And I thought I was going to be a doctor. I said, "Oh, mister, I'm going to be a doctor." And his son wanted to be a lawyer. Anyway, he said, "Good." He said, "Don't go into the car business." I'm like, "Well, why not?" He said, I'll never forget this. He said, "We just took apart, I believe it was a Toyota Corolla, and we can't make that car for twice the price." I'll never forget that. And it was Detroit kind of at its peak in terms of the auto industry. And they kind of knew, right? They knew that they were facing competition, and it was cheaper labor, but the quality was getting better. And that was the turning point. So Detroit has changed from, I've looked at a GM, I've looked at Ford, spent not as much time with Chrysler, and post bankruptcy, post 08, 09, and post the employment obligations, which were restructured in 05, 06, the industry has changed dramatically financially. I also think they seem to be a lot more nimble. Right now, Tesla is at level 2 autonomy in their software. GM's about to go to level 3. Audi's at level 3 now, and Google through Waymo is at level 4. So Tesla's actually one of the laggards in autonomy. Detroit and Germany are ahead of it. So for all the talk about technology, whatever, you have to understand that Detroit and the Japanese and the Germans are throwing tens of billions of dollars into autonomy, into mobility projects, and into EVs. So this is, they're every bit as cutting edge as Tesla, if not more so.
And Jim, if I could add to that, people don't know this, and I think we've undersold this as a marketplace. Detroit's the capital of the world in autonomy and autonomous vehicles.
It is.
Not just the hardware, the software. I mean, Google and Waymo just opened up a big office here. They're coming in from
It's
everywhere.
not Silicon Valley, it's here.
No, it's here, and it's going to become more and more here. And one of the
That's right.
reasons we're optimistic.
I mean, Tesla has sold a great story about this, but the actual innovation is happening here in Germany, and so I think that again, Detroit's better positioned for that than they were in the 70s change and the 90s changeovers. I think they see it coming, and they're going to try to get in front of it. Porsche, from a German point of view, Porsche's got the Mission E coming out in January of 19. That's an $85,000 car that has been designed ground up as an EV, and will charge twice as fast as a Tesla Model S. You're gonna have to get a new one, and will go 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, whatever, and it's gorgeous. And so all this stuff, it came out of their Le Mans effort. All these companies now have seen what Elon did. I like to point out that what Elon did was simple. He made EVs sexy. He made them aspirational. Prior to that, you had to compromise to be green, right? You had to buy a little Bug and Prius, whatever, and you felt good, but it was a Bug. And he made the Model S this sexy, aspirational car that Dan wants to drive.
No, now it's sexy to be nauseous when you go 0 to 60 in a golf cart.
So, and that's great, and he did that, and that's what he got right. But now he's got the entire automotive world that's figured that out and coming out with their entire lines and stuff like the Mission E ground up, making aspirational cars. And now he's fighting a different fight.
Great Bill.
Jim, how formative were your Guilford security years in making yourself a great short seller?
So I was at Guilford. Guilford actually made me the short seller because I went from investment banking and I joined this little shop in Chicago called Guilford Securities to become a research analyst in early 1982. And the very first company they asked me to look at was a company called Baldwin United, which was the old Baldwin Piano Company, good Midwestern company, Cincinnati. And it was a complete and utter fraud. It had morphed into financial services, was selling annuities and booking this crazy accounting on them. Ended up going bankrupt in 83. It was the largest financial service bankruptcy in U.S. history at that time. My boss, the partner in Chicago, we had all this information. We documented everything. We'd gotten files from the state of Arkansas. We could prove the fraud. And the stock, of course, doubled on us. And the New York partner wanted to fire me. And the Chicago partner, said, we're not firing this kid. I'm putting my reputation on the line. I've seen the work. We're going to stay with it. And that could have been the end of my career right there. And a guy, Bob Holmes, went to bat for me, and I'm forever grateful. And it was the very first research report I ever wrote. It turned out to be a giant fraud.
Let's ask you quick, Jim. Any short that you've been wrong on that you?
Lots of them.
No, but I mean in a big way, like
Yeah, the biggest one we got wrong price-wise and sort of reputationally was we were famously short America Online in the late 90s, And basically, I started shorting at around $10. I think we covered our last share at about 80. That'll get your attention, right? And then Time Warner bought them at the equivalent of 100. And it was an accounting story. I don't know if you guys remember this. I know Dan does, but remember all those discs they used to give out at the checkout, the CDs of America Online? Well, they were capitalizing all those costs, and they weren't expensing them. And basically, their churn was a lot higher than they were letting on. And so if you did the numbers, you kind of realized even at $19.95 a month, they probably were never going to make money on a subscriber. And they were playing all kinds of other accounting games with barter transaction, whatever. It didn't matter. And so there was a point of our risk management. AOL was never much more than 0.5% or 1% position, even on the way up. So it cost us 6 or 7 or 8% over 3-4 years. It was not a killer. But we looked pretty dumb. And then, of course, we covered, Time Warner bought them. What we should have done is been short Time Warner. But
and a quick little anecdote. Tim Armstrong, who's the CEO of AOL,
Yeah.
Verizon, and I just talked to him.
Yep.
And we were talking, and there's 180 to 200,000 people in the United States today still paying the AOL monthly fee.
Yeah, yeah.
The online, I swear,
It's
I
true.
go, why? He goes, I have no idea. But
it's the power of the negative checkoff business, right?
Yep.
Once they get you, you kind of forget about it.
Yep.
Great. We have a question over here.
Hi. So for when you're establishing a short position, you talked a lot about going through like the company's balance sheets and stuff like that, the core business.
Yep.
How important is technical indicators like implied volatility, momentum in the broader market indices? Maybe makes you wait 6 months or something before you actually establish that short position.
Yeah, so I'll paraphrase Will Rogers. And basically our whole view on that is the only short stocks that go down. If they're not going to go down, don't be short them, right? And so, all these things are helpful. But I found technical analysis to be incredibly helpful using hindsight. It has not been helpful for us on a predictive basis. I've had stocks with breakouts that you would have said, oh, you're going to cover, and then the fraud gets announced, the fraud's uncovered a month later and the stock collapses. So for us, we use basically a percent of capital as a risk metric. And basically, remember, for most of our accounts, we're hedged along the market anyway. So, for us, I'll take the idiosyncratic risk of the position. I don't care about the systematic risk of the market. That's my client's decision, how they want to be positioned. So, and again, when you're short domestically 50 stocks or globally 70 stocks, you're always going to have a few that are breaking out or whatever, and a few that are breaking down. But we found that by and large, the ability of the immediate past price performance to predict the future is kind of a coin flip.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, Jim. Thank you very much for speaking. It was very interesting. My name's Ken Fruhoff. Question, you mentioned healthcare and that it may be running into some headwinds. And to find these ideas, are you starting at a sector and then digging down? Because you are mentioning kind of a laser focus to some of the stories.
Yeah.
For example, the Wall Street Journal article on Enron. So how do you start, and then how do you get to that endpoint? And if it is in fact a sector that you're looking at to start, what sectors looking forward would you tend to think are overvalued or would be ones to avoid?
That's a great question. And so how much of what we do is so-called top down and how much is bottoms up? Ideally, it's all bottoms up. But what we have found historically is that a large amount of our alpha, our excess performance, is tied not only to stock performance, but industry performance. That's just a reality. We've looked at our numbers through 30 years. And so the reality was, like the Dynegy Enron story I gave you, once we realized what was happening with Enron and their accounting and the structure of their merchant banking operation, all of the energy merchant banks should have been shorted. Now, we only shorted Dynegy and worked out fine on top of Enron. But the fact of the matter is they all went down 80 to 100%. And the problem was specific to the industry, much like the domestic oil and gas guys today. I will tell you, in China, we came at China because of the bottoms up. A lot of people say, oh, you've got these views on China, which we didn't really get into today, but we started looking at China in the fall of '09. It's a great story. Dan will appreciate it. And so I was trying to figure out why the commodity guys, the miners, copper miners, iron ore, why they were all reporting record profits in the teeth of the global crisis. Now, I knew the answer was China, but I just kind of didn't know to the extent. And we were sitting in our conference room, and my real estate analyst was putting some numbers up on the whiteboard. And he said, currently in China, this was, I think, November of '09.
I remember that time.
Currently in China, there's 5.6 billion square meters of high-rise space under development, half office and mixed use, half residential. And I kind of looked at him and I said, oh wait, Alex, you're making a rookie mistake. You're making the metric, conversion. It can't be 5.6 billion square meters. It's 5.6 billion square feet, because 5.6 billion square meters is almost 60 billion square feet. And he looked at me kind of with fear in his eyes, as young Alice. He goes, I triple-checked the numbers. It's 5.6 billion square meters. And I thought for a second. I said, well, if half of that's office space, that's 30 billion square feet that's currently under development. That's a 5-foot by 5-foot office cubicle for every man, woman, and child in China.
Now you know why they lifted that birth restriction.
And so it's like, and I had been short the commercial real estate bubble of the late '80s when they changed the tax law, and we were short some of the credit companies in 05, 06, 07. But like that, the light bulb went on. And I'm like, wait a minute, what? And then we started doing a deep dive on the credit figures, the economy, and their economic model, and we suddenly realized there's never been a real estate bubble or credit bubble like we have today in China. Never. Not Japan, not Spain, not the US, never. This is unprecedented what they're doing over there. And so that led us to all kinds of other things. But it started with bottoms up. And in healthcare, just to finish your question, we started looking at a variety of healthcare companies after the ACA was passed. We thought that Obamacare would be bad for business. It was great for business, and we realized that sort of early on. But as time went on, we began to look at more and more of these models, and the one that got us really interested was a company called Valiant Pharmaceuticals, which turned out to be the largest single hedge fund loss in history when it blew up in 15 and 16. And they were in this business of buying drugs and hiking the prices dramatically. And as we got into that, we started looking at other guys, and then we stumbled onto all kind of companies that were involved, like Mallinckrodt and others that were involved in what I call the rent-seeking behavior. And as we got deeper into that, and we started understanding reimbursement procedures and whatever, we got a new administration, and it's not a political thing, but clearly a new administration, new Congress, which had completely different views, and we're going to begin to restrict all this stuff. And the more we've gotten into that, the more we've realized that a lot of the healthcare economy now is really facing some serious risk.
We'll take a few more questions. Before I do, I just wanted to share, I haven't mentioned it yet today, but Jim manages over about $2.5 billion of funds, and his current fund, long-short fund, is up 26% year to date. He's outperformed significantly for the last 15 years. He typically has a $2 million minimum, and he has arranged with us to structure something in a way that we can take investments below $2 million. Questions? Yes?
Yeah, how do you contemplate where we currently are in the market cycle relative to your short position?
So again, how do we change our short? By and large, again, we let the client make that decision. So for lack of a better term, we have kind of three pools: short only, where the client brings the long side to the party; market neutral; or 190-90, where it's basically our benchmark is the market itself. And the idea is I'm spending all my time on the short portfolio, the rest is financial engineering. Now, having said that, there's one little twist. We found over the 32 years that our short alpha, which basically is lumpy. There's lots of years where it's kind of nothing, and then there's a number of years where it explodes. The short alpha itself is, historically anyway, has been a precursor to generally more difficult markets. Meaning when we suddenly start to outperform dramatically, when stuff starts falling apart, even though the market's going higher or churning, usually that means the market's kind of in trouble. And so we will do our weightings a little bit less long in our hedged vehicles if and when that happens.
Is that happening now?
No, it's still, I knew you were going to ask that. No, it's still flashing green. And so for what, you know, and by the way, it's missed some too, but other than that, and even then in the 190-90, we might only shade it 10%. I'm fearful of trying to time markets. I think it's basically almost impossible to do.
Are you of the school of Warren Buffett who basically says if you're not going to do the work, if you're not going to be involved in doing the work and picking stuff for long term,
go passive.
Buy an index fund.
Yeah, for most people that should be core. If people are doing interesting things like debt securities, private placements, whatever, they can add value. And I'm a big believer in that. And I sit on investment committees, so I actually allocate capital too. But for the core part of your equity portfolio or your bond portfolio, there should be some low fee, get your exposure that way. And then if you find smart people that you like who are doing something interesting, that can be, and diversify your portfolio, that can be fine. And that can be part of a portfolio too. But for the most part, if some guy is in a mutual fund and he's buying big cap, large cap US equity stocks, and he's charging you 2% to do it.
That's what you would call renting?
Rent-seeking behavior, yeah, because he's not going to beat the S&P by that much, and you're throwing money away.
I'm absolutely using that starting this afternoon, rent-seeking behavior. Got a lot of,
So, Dan, I think you mentioned that there's
How you doing?
There's a hope bias, like Americans, people think that things are going to go up.
That's good. That's what's made this country great, actually.
So is there a way to exploit that inefficiency other than finding stocks that you think are going to go down?
Well, so I think the structure in our hedged vehicles, which were long the market passively, actually works on that, because when people try to start picking stocks on their own, they generally do pretty miserably, getting back to the last question. And quite frankly, the indices themselves are dynamic, right? The stuff that fails you never see because they kick it out. And so there's all kinds of studies that have been done of people that have had buy and hold portfolios. They've done terribly. The whole idea of the index is that you're constantly putting in the index the stuff that is succeeding. And so again, the idea is most hedge funds do the opposite, right? They try to pick stocks and then they hedge the market by going short the market. And there's just too many smart people trying to do that, right, on the long side. We'd much rather go at it from the telescope on the other side and say, okay, hard to beat the market on the long side. We're pretty decent at what we do in our little corner of the nefarious, business models and executives and rent seekers in our world. Let's just have that our insurance policy and just be long America on the other side.
Eventually a free market destroys the rent seekers, doesn't it?
It should, but they can go on a long time. It can go on a long time.
Yeah. Tony, did you have a question before?
Right, there was a question. I'm just really curious about your deliberative process. So you mentioned two things that were extremely interesting to me. One, you mentioned, ironically, the magazine cover and the pictures of him in SpaceX. And then you mentioned potential modifications in the U.S. healthcare market, just as far as public policy changes. Both of those things aren't really analytical type of things, right? So I love to understand what a partners meeting looks like, right? So you have your model.
It's a good question.
And then you have the affirmation of your gut.
So again, our firm's a little bit different, as the guys know, because we're very top heavy. The partners actually generate most of the ideas, where in most hedge funds, I don't get this. They put the onus on the youngest, most inexperienced people in the firm to come up with ideas, and they pitch to the senior people. And like, why would you do that, right? Well, first of all, why would you waste your time? Because some of the stuff might not even be borrowable. We can't even short it. And for us, it's much better that the top guys have been doing this for a long, long time. Part of the reason for that, and your question about a partners meeting is a good one, in that the process is not only analytical, but with the people, and I'm really proud of the fact that the six of us have 170 years on the street, over 120 at Kinnikos. So I have partners been with me 25 years, is that there's pattern recognition. And that's the stuff you can't teach. Because when we were looking at Valiant Pharmaceuticals, this roll-up, which turned out to be a great short idea for us, of course it doubled first, by the way. When we were talking about the idea and we called in our analyst to walk us through some of the accounting, the acquisition accounting on it, the partners all looked at each other and we said, Tyco International. We had seen this before. We had seen this at a very celebrated short of ours, Tyco, where the guys went to jail. And we saw the way he played games with the roll-up accounting, and it was exactly the same at Valiant, exactly. And there, that was from 16 years earlier, but the partners had pattern recognition, whereas basically you've seen this movie before? And so then we dug deeper. That was, for us, a signal that something didn't seem right here. And let's go and it paid off.
You know,
So
what's interesting is literally what you're saying, not so much in stocks, but we have these conversations around human beings.
Yeah.
No BS. Like, that's the Smith movie from...
Well, it's often the secret sauce,
movie.
right?
It's the same movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we use that term. So
Yeah, I mean, but also it comes from a lot of work, right? And a lot of experience and a lot of ideas and stuff that doesn't work. And, you know, and you kind of remember, okay, I'm going to stay away from this side short idea because I've also seen thin float, total promoter, company, guys are getting behind it. Let's just avoid this for a year or two and come back to it. So that's just experience. And often it's not right, but more often it is. And you have to use that to supplement just the spreadsheets and the analytical work. You got to do that too. But having some judgment and having been through market cycles also helps. You know, fund was started in '85, so I've seen, you know, 4 or 5 rip-roaring bull markets. And they're all a little different, but they all have also some similar characteristics.
Jim, we got the hook just now.
No hook. Jim has agreed, I believe, to be here for a little while longer. So we want to adjourn out here shortly, but I just want to introduce myself. I'm Jason Zimmerman. I'm Mark Schechter's brother-in-law and also Greg Schechter's brother-in-law. And Greg Schechter came from Seattle, and we're really proud of you, Greg. Thank you, Dan and Jim.
Thank you.
This has been, we knew it would be entertaining and thought-provoking. And you guys are great, entertaining, and at Schechter, we want to also be entertaining sometimes, but today we wanted to be informative, and we are trying to identify opportunities like Jim's fund, Kinnikos, and it's just an honor to be up here talking to you guys. And Dan, you had a vision for Detroit. Yep. And it's just plain to everybody here that we wouldn't be sitting down here if it wasn't for you. So your vision, and not only your vision, your drive. So I assume that was for Dan. So
can I just want to interject one thing. So the love of my life, the one I've been seeing for the last 8 years, is currently finishing her economics degree at NYU. And I told Dan this before we went on. I was showing her some pictures in front of the Werner's machine at one of his little hideaways. The Schechters actually got her addicted to Werner's by sending me this package about Michigan stuff, and she thought it was the greatest thing ever. She's a native New Yorker. Anyway, she said, "Oh my God, you're meeting Dan Gilbert. We're reading about him in my urban econ class at NYU, that this is a man that quite literally is making over a major city, and that has not happened in the United States since Robert Moses. If you know your urban history in New York in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And it was like high praise. So I thought that to hear that real time.
I'm just thrilled you're not short Detroit. That's number one.
No, not at all.
And number two, I mean, we just have we have over 17,000 full-time people downtown now, but we have great people. Some are here in the room. How many people are with us? We had some people back there, some guys coming from the floor, the banker floor themselves, our top guys, and this was a pleasure. This is an honor, and I just think that, man, when I talk to people like you, whether it's you or Warren Buffett, first of all, number one, just the thread, what'd you say, pattern recognition? They're always just good people, nice, can explain things simply, and in a way that everybody understands what they're talking about. That's the common thread, and I think it's just an honor.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
Great.
So, thank you guys. So Jim, I also want to give you some props. You see things within company financials that other people don't see, and sometimes there are strong headwinds in your face. And conventional wisdom, like you said earlier, tells you that you're wrong. So your conviction to see those things through has earned you and your investors tremendous returns. And obviously, we're not in any way trying to compare ourselves to you guys, but we're investing with you. Our family, Greg, you might not know this yet, but we're going to be investing with Jim. And depending upon your individual circumstances, you can invest directly into Jim's fund or via one of these vehicles that we're developing with Jim, which enables you to capitalize on some of the efficiencies of insurance products to shelter the tax. So that's our tiny commercial. So we'd like to invite you to join us for some hors d'oeuvres, cocktails, and more conversation. Thank you all for coming and braving the weather.
Thanks.